Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there. This is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franze Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franze Show. A behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franze.
Well, hello and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franze, and if you're new here, this is where we take a deep dive into the entertainment industry to provide you with valuable insights and entertaining stories. This week, we get to talk with one of Nashville's most sought-after guitar players. We get to talk with Jeff King. We'll talk about how he got a start in Nashville, the different producers he's had a chance to work with, and we'll take a deep dive into his time working with Reba. Now, I've had a chance to work with Jeff on countless sessions. However, I can still remember that first session. It was over at Ocean Way Studios on Music Row in Nashville. And when he walked in, he just had this presence about him. He didn't look like the rest of the players. He was tall, he was wearing this flannel shirt, and he had this real serious look on his face. But it wasn't long before I realized, although he was serious about his craft, he wasn't all that serious in general, and he just brought the fun into the session. He was a great guy. He was easy to work with, not to mention the fact that he's just super talented. And it was that attitude that just made me look forward to every session after that. So if you'd like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jayfranze.com. Now let's get started. Jeff, sir, how are you?
I am fantastic, Jay. How about you?
You know what? I am here, my friend. I am having a blast. It is so good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. What was it, 4 or 5 years ago at Ocean Way in Nashville?
It was, yes, sir. Was it Lee Brice?
Probably was, yeah.
Probably. I believe it was.
Yeah.
All right, sir, let's jump in. Can you tell me how growing up in East Tennessee molded your musical influences?
Well, that's a good question, Jay, because, growing up in East Tennessee, I grew up in a little town called Townsend, which had 0 live entertainment venues. And my cousin played bluegrass in his front lawn maybe every Sunday afternoon, but I never really was a bluegrasser. So I found myself in my bedroom playing along with records like the Eagles, The Long Run, and, some Marshall Tucker stuff. And when I wanted to get a little pop and jazz going, I'd go over to the Atlanta rhythm section, which, at that time as a kid was like, well, these are some pretty adult chords that I don't know, and I have to figure this stuff out. But just learning, trying to figure out how to get the sounds and how to play the notes and how to play the notes with meaning. And, at whatever age I started, probably, I got my first acoustic guitar when I was 10, found it in the back of my uncle's closet. And I had been listening to, my aunt had a 45 of the Dobie Gray Drift Away. And I remember sitting in front of that phonograph, and playing that single record just over and over, just listening and going, I've never heard anything like this. And it just like reached out and grabbed me. And I thought, I have to figure this out. I have to figure out how to do this. So very slow building process, because at that time we didn't have YouTube. So you couldn't really just go on YouTube and go, hey, how do you play Drift Away? You had to sit there and go, okay, there's 2 sides and they're going back and forth. Now I need to not hear this side and I need to hear this side. So you unplug the speaker.
That's funny.
Yeah. And then just, like with the Eagles, trying to learn things like, at that point, Hotel California was way too advanced for me, but I started with I Can't Tell You Why, just a beautiful ballad song. You'd know it. You go, oh, yeah. So anyway, there's some great solos in there, but it's slow and melodic and very soulful. You just try to pick up what you can from that and mimic basically how they do it. And then, as you do that more and more, it kind of goes into your body, soul, and your mind, and you kind of try to emulate the style and whatever you're playing at the time.
Yeah, it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah. A thinking muscle memory, because you want to feel like what does soul feel like, or whatever you're doing at the time. It's just it's part of it.
So what you're describing is learning by ear. Did you have any formal training?
I had a friend of the family came out and taught me Wildwood Flower when I was a kid. I remember playing that over and over, practicing it over and over and over. And of course, my first acoustic guitar had strings on it that were probably, painful. But I didn't give up. Just kind of, he taught me a few basic chords, and he was really a singer, and he was a great singer. His name was Ronnie Sullivan. Just a great guy. I was really thankful of him giving his time to come out and help me out a little bit. But, it's like one of those things where every time you get another building block, you want to go, okay, how do I get one more up? And so at that time, like I said, no YouTube or any of those fast things that you could just jump right to it. You had to sit down and, put the record player on the slowest speed, or put it on regular speed and put your finger on it when you wanted to hear the lick, because you had to slow it down somehow. So
That's too funny.
Yeah.
So that was early on. At what age is it that you decided you were going to move to Nashville?
Well, I had gone to East Tennessee State University out of high school, and I played guitar from about 10 on up to that point. And it was sort of a backseat because I played sports all through high school. So I went to East Tennessee State, and a couple things happened there. I got a degree in engineering, and I graduated, and I thought, I'm going to move to Nashville. Of course, my parents were like, But I thought, well, I'll move to Nashville because I love music, and that's the place to be if you love music and if you want to try to do something in this crazy business. And if not, I can get a job as an engineer down here. And while I was in college, I was in a couple local bands. I think my first gig was at an Elks Club in Elizabeth, Tennessee, up in East Tennessee. And at the end of the night, minus our tab, for a college kid, they gave us $30 each. And I was like, man. And of course, this was, no one, my age is irrelevant, but, that was probably 1980 or 1979. And I just went, wow, I've got all this money now. It's like, I could make $60 a weekend, Yeah, then I moved down here and found out this is not going to be that easy. Surely you've heard of Brent Mason.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So
absolutely.
Some friends of mine said, hey, go check out this club. There's a really good guitar player. I walked in and Brent was playing. That's the first guy I saw play in Nashville. So I just went,
he's not that good, but
man, I thought, yeah, he's not that good. No, I just said, boy, this is the bar. I'm going to really have to work my tail off. And so that in itself became 2 or 3 nights a week for me to go down there a couple hours a night and try to learn something and try to get home with, some of the things he played and some of the ideas, basically. And Brent and I became friends back then. So that was 1983. Jay, that's been 40 years ago almost, in June.
And you're still friends to this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, he is an amazing guitar player as well.
Absolutely.
So what were the challenges that you felt like you had to overcome?
Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I was probably about a 0.3 guitar player. And I just thought, it's not going to work unless I spend some serious time and really figure out how to learn some stuff. I wanted to come to Nashville to go on the road with some big artists because, growing up, you see a concert and you think, wow, man, that's got to be the coolest thing ever. And I did accomplish that. And, now I'm back doing that part-time with Reba and Brooks and Dunn. I go out with both of those bands. But there was a long time in between where I just stayed home and did sessions. So that was a really good time too.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because in Nashville specifically, there seems to be a divide between the studio musicians and the musicians that go on the road. So did you find there were any challenges since you were doing both?
So I moved here in 83, played a bunch of clubs, worked really hard. And in 85, Patty Loveless was a new country artist. And I was in her first band. I was there for about 5.5, maybe 6 years. I learned a lot of really deep diving on guitar parts, tones. And a lot of that is because I was fortunate enough to be in that band where people would come out and they would go, hey, you might think about using this other guitar for that sound. And these were guys like Emery Gordy who, they have extensive knowledge of all this stuff because they produced part of the records. And some of your listeners may be familiar with Emery, but Emery was, played bass with Elvis and John Denver. And I mean, all these guys back in the day, moved to Nashville and was really big in the, like Steve Earle. He was on some of those records and co-producing a bunch of stuff. And Emery would say, hey, I think you might want to try Telly on this song, and go back and listen to Albert Lee or Ray Flack and listen to what they're playing. You're close, but you might want to oh, okay. So you learn how to do the deep dive and not almost get it. You really have to sit there until you go, this is it. And again, you're learning to play with inflections and certain things that may not be comfortable to you at the time, but you have to kind of learn those things. So my challenge was to get the records to be as close to the record as possible. At that point, I got into string benders, just trying to get great tones and to be the best I could, and unfortunately falling short every night.
I wouldn't say that. And it's funny, you mentioned Patty Loveless. We had Scotty Simpson on here a few episodes ago, and he brought you up and talking about how great you were as well.
Oh.
He had a blast playing with you back then, and I know that's how you started. So how did you make that transition into the studio?
Well, the transition into the studio was interesting because, like I said, I was with Patty for probably almost 6 years. All that deep diving and trying to play a little more naturally and with more definition and more thought, but yet try to make it feel like you're just thinking of it. I started paying off, and I started getting little calls for demos and be out on the road with Patty for 2 weeks in the summer or whatever, and I'd get a call for 2 demos, which the demos were good money, but there was never a thought about the money. I always thought, I've got to make these right decisions, and the money will figure itself out. So after a while, it was starting to bug me that I was missing so much stuff when that's kind of what I wanted to do. I remember hanging up the phone with Patty. I called her. It was around the first of the year, which must have been 91, might have been 92. I can't remember. But I remember hanging up the phone, going from, I'm making pretty good money here with Patty. Hang up the phone. Zero. I mean, zero. But she was so cool. She was like, I know you want to go get into more recording. So Tony Brown produces me. I would like, why don't you call Tony and call Emery, call these guys. What can you do? You want to come in and sit on some sessions and listen to guys like Reggie Young, Steve Gibson? You want to go? I mean, maybe there's a time when they'll call you to play on some stuff. She was the greatest, still is the greatest ever. Still talk to her once, twice a year, and dearest to my heart. So I did, and then maybe 2 calls a month turned into 4 calls a month, turned into 8, turned into, how it was in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, we could just not work anymore. There was no more time. I would leave the house at 9 a.m. and get back home at 10 p.m. And we do this 5-6 days a week. And at that point, we were still young enough and I guess young enough and hungry enough to just love it so much that we say yes to everything, because we didn't get called for things until you do. And then you have this weird thing about saying no to something that you've worked so hard to finally make it to. So you don't say no, you just wear down.
Well, you don't say no, because then say no too many times and they're going to stop calling you.
Absolutely, yeah.
But, I mean, you mentioned Tony Brown. You couldn't have had a better start than that. You start with Patty Loveless, and then you get referred to Tony Brown as one of the top producers in town.
Absolutely. And Tony was a good music guy, too. He's a good music producer.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, he's great.
Yeah.
So how does that feel now? Do you have any moments that just stand out to you as being some of the best?
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of different moments that you think about, like moments with my friends where we laughed and we just had a great time. And we were all in everybody's circle. My circle was probably 5 or 6 drummers, 5 or 6 bass players, the same keyboard players, acoustic guitars, steel players. And somehow 5 or 6 of us would show up on a date and everybody knew each other. And, the beauty of that is you get to know your friends and your families, and it's a very tight community. And most of the time, all the guitar players were super cool. Hey, I heard you on such and such, man. It sounded really good. Or I can't wait for us to do something together, or whatever. And I was very fortunate in many of those regards. And I got to play on sessions with Dan Huff and Reggie Young and Steve Gibson and Chris Lusinger, Brent Rowan, Brent Mason. All, we did a bunch of stuff even recently last year. And I know I'm probably leaving some guys out, but Bukovac and all the young guys now too. It's just been it's been very cool to see what everybody does and the adaptation that we all have. Okay, I hear you doing this. Now I'm going to go do this, and we're going to make a thing.
Well, you're naming some of the best. And I mean, as far as musicians go, but also as far as producers go, but you're naming one, Dan Huff, who's both a great musician as well as a great producer. What was it like working with him?
Dan was the most generous, easygoing, very knowledgeable, and soulful, and just sort of understood music. I mean, sometimes we would cut a song and we go, "Hey, that's just not quite it. Let's search on this a minute. Maybe the drummer does something different." And Dan would say, "You're here because you're going to do some things that's going to allow me to do some other things." And it's like, "Okay, what do you want me to do? On this one, I want you to play 8th notes in the verse and then chords in the choruses." And it's like, absolutely. I'm sitting here 6 feet from the guy that is way up here.
Well, he's produced so many great records, but he was a musician in the band Giant in, the 80s?
Yeah.
I mean, he's just an amazing guitar player himself.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah.
So you work on some of these sessions and you're working with the best, and you mentioned the people. It's more about the people in some cases than it is about the project. And I can relate to that because I've worked on a lot of projects in Nashville, and whenever I would see your name on the list of musicians, I knew it was going to be a good time. Please don't take it the wrong way, but you are a jokester when you're in the studio. You like to have as much fun as you do, go in there and perform. I always knew it was going to be a more relaxed session than some of the others. Do you feel like that's something that's true to you?
Oh, absolutely. Anytime we got a chance to make fun of ourselves, we would do that. I always thought, and I still do think, that if you're relaxed in the studio, then you will play your best. And if the guy next to you is pushing you a little bit, you see the bass player and everybody's comfortable and they're laughing. And if so what if I hit a wrong note? I can fix it,
Oh, yeah.
But if I hit a wrong note, that doesn't mean, no, I don't know what I'm doing. It means I was going for something. Now I know. Right. Where it's going to be next time. And the songs drive you. You mentioned Lee Brice earlier. I was the session leader on a bunch of his first records, which meant that I get all the songs after they choose them. They send me the songs. I write the charts. I show up with the number charts at the sessions and kind of help the producer run the sessions and kind of try to, sometimes when they say, "Hey, that's not, let's try this instead." If somebody goes, "I'm not sure what you're talking about," then I try to go to the guy and go, the writer or the artist or the producer, and go, "Help us understand this a little bit better. Give us a thought of what you mean so we can do this for you." Our dear friend Matt McClure was on a lot of those things as a co-producer on some of that. And one story comes to mind is the big hit song, "I Drive Your Truck." I remember sitting at my desk getting the MP3 in the mail going, "Oh my gosh, here's another truck song. Haven't we had enough of these?" And then 3 minutes later, I'm pretty fast at charting just because I've done thousands and thousands of charts. So I'm writing the numbers out, and I stop after the first chorus, and I'm like, okay, I've got to stop and go back a little bit. So I back it up. By the end of the second chorus, I'm stopping, and I'm kind of going, oh my gosh, somebody finally wrote a really cool song. And by the end of the song, I'm going, this is not about a truck.
No.
And there's, from what you get in the title. So I took I went to the session, and I had, the person up front, they made charts, and they bring us back a stack of all the copies of all the charts I've written. And like, what do we start with? So we start with whatever. We cut that song, and then, it's probably maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or I can't remember if it was a nighttime session or whatever, but I do remember we were pretty relaxed. So it may have been like a 6 or 7 o'clock, something like that. And I handed out the charts to I Drive Your Truck, and all the guys in the band looked down, and I see them go, and I looked at them. I said, hey guys, this is not what you think it is. You better get ready for this. And so then they played the work tape. I look around, and big tough session guys just, golly, man. And we were like, we better listen to this again, because I kind of bailed on it about the top of the second verse. I don't remember. I was just listening to the sadness of the song, and the dad wanted to be closer, wanting to be close to the son, and then learning how the writers wrote that song was something else. That they were headed to a writing appointment one day, and unfortunately I can't remember all the writers on that song, but there was a female writer, and she's really great, and I've worked for her so many times. But she was listening to NPR, and they had a dad on there talking about losing his son in the Iraq War, I think. And he said, well, what do you do? How do you deal with this? He said, well, I just drive his truck around. It's got all this stuff in it. It's got his baseball hat. It's got all this stuff in the floorboard. We all had junk in our trucks. And she said, I had to stop and pull over and cry. And she tells the story, and then she shows up at the writing appointment and says, guys, I just heard this story, and I think there's a way we can figure out how to write this. And boom, next thing you have is that song. Yeah, it was intense.
No, that is an absolutely amazing song. It's probably my favorite Lee Brice song out of everything he's got out there right now.
Yeah.
Like you, I was lucky to be part of the project, and you mentioned Matt. When I first moved to Nashville, it was in 99. I got lucky. I hooked up with 3 producers right out of the gate, and was able to get my feet wet working with them. And one of them was Matt McClure, one of them was Jim Cristaldi, and the other was Bob Bullock. And I got a chance to work with those 3 guys, and they couldn't be any more different than each other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But man, what a great group of guys. And to me, I play bass guitar, I play keyboards, but my fingers know what they're supposed to do, but I just can't get them to do it. So how do you get your mind wrapped around just listening to a song? I mean, what's the key to just listening to it and being able to chart it right then and there?
Well, first of all, I've said this to people before. You have to play the song. You have to figure out what is going to be the platform, so this song can really shine and be the coolest it can be. And it's funny that just a quick story on that. And you've been in the studio when we're cutting a bunch of songs, and somebody will go, we're listening to the song, and you go, nobody's listening. And because they're all telling jokes or talking about their kids' kindergarten or whatever. And somebody, one, artist or writer said, hey, they're not even listening. Do we need to listen again? I said, no, they heard it. They heard what they needed to hear for their particular thing. So you listen for the groove. What type of song, what's the flow going to be? What kind of, where the accents are going to be? How does the vocal float on the top? As a guitar player, you got about 800 options that you think of right then. You go, okay, do I want to play a Tele, a Les Paul, a Gretsch, a Strat, some other goofball guitar that makes a weird sound? Do I want to use an overdriven sound? Do I want to use a clean sound? I want to get heavier. And the song kind of says, its aggression will tell you. By that point, you go out and sit down and you put your headphones on, and the drummer's kind of starting to get some ideas. All of a sudden, this song just takes shape and it just comes into a ball and it blossoms. And, that's not without incident. Like I said, there's going to be some things where, like the drummer might plow into a section. Then we learn afterwards, like, he's very serious right here. This guy's his heart's broke. So why don't we come down here? Let's give him a chance to grieve a little bit. And the bass will find its part, and the keyboards kind of float and do whatever, or sometimes they're the main instrument. As guitar players, a lot of times there are two electric players on a session. So I always look at it as one guy has this side, one guy has this side, and we're just trying to make it sound like there's this nice thing that's floating from what we do, and we try to have different sounds. This guy might use a Gretsch, this guy might use a Strat, depending on the song. Do you want to turn on a delay? You want to soak your Gretsch and reverb. And I used to call it, when I first started playing sessions, somebody would ask me a question like that, and I'd say, this is what I call option anxiety, because you have to go out there and go, oh my gosh, I could do this, I could do this. And then at some point you don't think that way anymore. You just go out and do it. And then after the first run through, your producer or amongst the guys on the session, we go, hey, why don't we take this little curve here and do this? And the things start to reveal themselves. It's how I like to think about it, because it does. It reveals itself. And I think the producers and engineers are there to kind of help you guide the terrain, basically. Sometimes you're going uphill, sometimes you're going down, and the sections of the songs need to somehow join together, and so it doesn't sound like you're leaving the planet to go to the bridge. You've been in those things. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, they're magical. And a couple of things you mentioned there, you talk about the musicians, how they might stumble and may go up when they should have gone down. But I think that's part of the reason why you're being chosen for the session. Not only as a session leader for you personally to direct musicians, but each musician has played on countless projects. You're choosing them for their experience, and they can hear a song in the background and say, okay, I can kind of get a feel for what they're looking for here. And they go in and they can capture it. All they need is guidance. They can play anything you want them to play. So as a producer or as an engineer, you go in there and you can request, hey, Jeff, can you play this a little heavier here? Can you play this with a little bit more growl to it? And you'll just do that. You can just instantly accomplish what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. But one of the things you mentioned is having two guitar players. And as an engineer, I know the reason why. But as a guitar player, when that first happened, did that offend you in any way?
I don't know. It didn't offend me. I was always like, wow, I get to listen to the other guy. I get to learn what's going on over here. But before that, as the lone electric player on a session, you would do a pass over here, and then you would do an accompanying pass. And then, you might have to do a solo. So you're doing 3 or 4 passes a song. So everybody's out in the lobby,
right,
going, hey, so they say, hey, let's grab another guitar player. So at first, 2 guys are looking at each other going, well, which one's of us is going to be the hero? It's like, well, it doesn't really work like that in the studio. There's like, who's going to get the solo? After a while, you don't care. You want to honor a song and hope that it's a great record for whoever you're working for. And I just found myself just grateful to be on the record and listen to the other guys play, listen to my friends be geniuses. And hopefully I can soak in some of that and somehow be considered to be part of that.
Well, I know we mentioned the different producers and just the difference between Matt McClure and Bob Bullock. When I worked with Bob Bullock, he had 10 songs. We're going to go in, we're going to accomplish these 10 songs. When I work with Matt, okay, today we got 20 songs we're going to do. Yeah. We're going to bring in several different writers. We're going to rotate them all. So if you don't have 2 guitar players going at one time, your day is just going to come to a grinding halt.
Absolutely.
Again, the reason for two guitar players is selfish on the producer's part to save time. It's not just because we want two different flavors. We literally just want to save the time.
Right.
So no, that's great. Is there any particular producer that you've had a chance to work with that, just seems to be leaps and bounds above others without hurting your career?
No, I don't think I think the interesting thing to me, I mean, there's the crowd of players that you show up and you go, well, these are some of my dearest friends, but everybody, we're all friends. And I found that it's hard to pick one producer because you show up and they're all different and they're all really cool guys. James Stroud used to do stuff for him. And, he came from the R&B background, like down Memphis and Muscle Shoals and all that. And so his take was like, let's find the pocket. Let's find this pocket. And then we can kind of add to the things that we need to add. Byron Gallimore, Faith, and Tim McGraw. And his thing was, he would find great songs. And then he would come in and he would get the guys that he wanted in the band that he trusted. And he would kind of just basically direct traffic and go, okay, let's work out smooth out these transitions and do things. And so everyone had just a bit of a different work style. And I think working with all the different guys like that, that's what was the cool thing. Sure, I wanted to work with Tony Brown all the time, but, then you look at those guys, they cut a record at one record every 2 months, maybe, because it takes a long time to follow that to the end of it. You needed to widen your book a little bit and try to get on as many lists as you could.
It's funny because, like, you take a producer like Matt McClure who comes from the engineering background, so everything is about the sound and the technique and how we do things, and he leaves more of the musical creativity to somebody like you as a session leader, where you have a Bob Bullock who comes from, don't want to offend, but more of the old school style of way of doing things, big lush reverb sounds, big rooms, and he goes for that big lush sound, but again leaves the musical creativity to like Chris Lusinger. And then there's people like Chaz Sanford, who's a musician himself and a songwriter himself, and he has this vision in his head and he just doesn't know how to get it to tape.
Right.
So it's just the different styles from each person. But you go back to a Dan Huff that has the musicianship and the technical ability and knows what he wants to hear. I mean, that to me seems like somebody who is a force when you get into a studio with.
Oh, yeah. Dan was, I remember, I can't remember exactly, but it might have been Brian White we were working on. And Dan played something in a verse. And I went, man, where did you come up with that? He said, that's Prince's third record, When Doves Fly. He says, there's a lick kind of like that in the second verse or whatever, bridge or something. And I went, you can do that? You can really just, but it wasn't exact. But, he was like, that's the idea. And I felt it. And I learned that record. And I'm like, man, I'm going home and learn all these records then, so. But yeah, Dan, gosh, I don't have enough good stuff to say. Just a gentleman and, always come out and just say nice things. And, it was never, no, that's not it. It was always, hey, let's just try something different here. What if you did this? And the way he delivered the message to you was like, man, I so want to do this. I so want this to work for you,
That's funny. I've never had the chance to work with Dan, but I've worked with his engineer and others around his camp, and it'd be a pleasure to sit in one of his sessions at some point. I'd like to turn this a little bit and just talk you're known for your time with Reba, and not only in the studio, but performing live. How did that come about? How did you meet Reba in the first place?
So there's a producer, David Malloy. So David was involved with Eddie Rabbitt back in the day, writing a bunch of great songs. And then he kind of, like a lot of engineers, they seem to come from either a songwriting background or engineering background, or like Dan, a player's background. So when I was doing tons of Dunn's and demos, I realized that sometimes people will go, "Oh, it's only a demo." It's like, no, it's not. One day somebody's going to hear this, and let me grab that solo one more time because I need this to be right. So I started getting hired on records because people were cutting songs of the writers that I was working for, and they're like, "Oh, who's playing this guitar? Oh, well, let's just get him on this session because he played this, so he knows what he's doing." So I would end up on, all those different sessions like that. So David heard something I played on. He said, "Hey, I want you to." David was very personal when he would call or when he would do stuff, and he called and he said, "Hey, Jeff, man, I want you to come and do this Reba record with me. It's going to be you and Dan Huff." And I'm like, "Awesome! I can't wait. This is going to be so cool." I get there, and Dan had something come up, unfortunately, so it was me and Jerry McPherson. So we did, a couple records over the span of a couple years. Reba had been out of touring for a while, doing a bunch of TV, and so they wanted to start cranking it back up again because she missed performing. So when they put the band together, there was some of the guys from that session and different guys from different places, they put together a whole new band, and Jerry got the call for that and was like, "That's awesome, Jerry, great." So Jerry did it for several years. In that band was my wife, Tammy King, who plays for the Steel Drivers. She had been there for a couple years, and then I get a call from Reba's manager, and he says, "Hey, Jerry's leaving. He's going to go over and play some gigs with Faith Hill. We were just sitting here thinking, do you want to come out and do some dates with us?" And I'm like, he goes, "We don't want any drama. We just want to go play some music and have fun. Since your wife's out here, just thought it might be cool if y'all want to basically like going on vacation." And I was like, wow. And at that time, my session load was pretty strong, but I was starting to feel a little bit crunchy. Like, the 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. thing was starting to wear on me just a little bit, and just get tired and a little burnout. So I thought, well, this might be cool. So I said, sure. And they said, "Hey, we've got 27 dates this year." I went, "Oh, that's nothing." So unlike anything I'd ever done, we rehearsed for 2 weeks before we went on the first gig. Most of the time you're just trying to remember the next song. But this time I knew exactly what I was going to play every night. And I had a little wiggle room on a couple songs where I could kind of be creative from night to night. But I found there was a real comfort in knowing exactly what was going to happen from everybody every night. And, the band leader did a great job on that. That was Doug Sizemore. And, Reba was killer. And I hadn't been out on the road since early 90s, and this was 2006. So I'd had probably 10 or 11 years of hard studio stuff. And those 27 dates, they didn't really stop anything. I missed some sessions, but, not many. And the perception had changed by that point that there was such a difference in road guys and studio guys, but I found not necessarily a difference in one better or the other. It's just one guy has learned to create and the other guy has learned how to recreate. And there's not a better or worse for that. It's just a different job. You could turn those around, and being a creator, I think sometimes has made me a better recreator because I can listen to something and go, okay, that's a quarter note delay and a dotted eighth. So that was in 2006, and I'm still here doing dates with Reba. So
what was that first show like?
That first show was so awesome because, like I said, I pretty much knew exactly what I was going to be playing, and I knew what was going to happen around me. That type of artist, they had the money to spend on doing everything right, which, in some of the other ones, they were just trying to get dates and get going. So if you were trying to rehearse a new record, you might rehearse for 2 days, and you'd just do a lot of woodshedding at home. And if you're a musician, you can sit home and just play perfect and run over it again and again and again and play it perfect every time. But when you're with a band and you're hearing different things happen, even though everyone's trying to play what's on the record, I can't remember what I'm supposed to be doing. You need more time. So that was the thing with Reba. We just rehearsed, and then we rehearsed with the stage and the production and the lights, and because that would add another level of stress, because you're standing there and all of a sudden you're supposed to start a song and the lights go dark, and then you hear a count off and you go, oh. So now that I know I'm going to be in the dark,
Right.
I'm going to turn a little bit because the keyboard
Get a
player has a
little
light
light.
and I can see, so you learn all these things, and
That's too
it's a lot of fun. It's a blast. She's awesome, and her whole organization is great.
So those shows, you're playing huge venues. Any particular venue that you were fond of?
I think a lot, that's a hard question, because sometimes you go into a place and you go, I don't know if I've been here before because I remember that poster on the wall or something. But the Houston Rodeo is always fun. It has its own source of nuttiness, and you go out and watch these kids ride the, I forget what they call it when they're riding the sheep, and they have helmets on. They're like 4-year-olds, and they're hanging on
Right.
sideways, and they will not let go. And the bull riding, all that stuff. It's just an exciting day.
That's funny.
Yeah. It's cool. Most towns are awesome, and they just have great people, and they come to the shows, and you can tell they're there to hear whoever, we're playing with.
Because of playing with Reba and playing some of these larger venues, and because of who she is, you've had the opportunity to play on all of the talk shows. Do you find it to be easier or harder to play on a talk show?
Well, when you see it coming, you start worrying a little bit. Okay, we're going to do, like I was able to do the Tonight Show 2 or 3 times with Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, and you think, wow, I'm going to be on TV. I've watched these shows, all of these shows, whoever,
Right.
Letterman, whatever. I've watched them all since can't remember. Boy, I don't want to be the guy that gets on there and screws up. I just don't want to do it. So, luckily you do maybe 2 songs and you just practice. And then you just hope for the best. You hope your nerves don't take over, because sometimes you just can't help it. But something I started doing is, like, on the regular concerts, I would start going, okay, I'd start getting my mind, playing tricks with my mind. Like, okay, what if this is David Letterman and I'm getting ready to play this solo? Well, how many nights in a row have I played this solo and executed it well and did what I meant to do? And then all of a sudden you start going, wait a minute, I don't really need to be nervous. I just need to focus and play it right. It's not a miracle that this is going to happen. It's because I practice it and I'm thinking about it and trying to put it in the right spot. So there we were doing David Letterman, and I'm standing out there and at sound check, I'm going, wow, this is so cool, And then there's always the unknown, which is always interesting. So everybody had said, man, it is so cold in there. So cold in there. Wear a sweatshirt, something, So at sound check, I had a sweatshirt on. I was thinking, this is not bad. They're like, yeah, it's not bad right now. So we went down, put our instruments up. Our techs took care of all that stuff. And we went down, went to the green room, hang out. And they finally say, all right, call time for Reba Band. So we go upstairs. I walk out into the room. My tech hands me my guitar, and I'm thinking, did he just have this in a freezer?
Is it in tune?
And it's in tune, and it was because it was like 49 degrees in there. And I'm not kidding. And it was like I just remember going, panic, because your strings don't feel the same at 49 degrees as they do at 65 or 70. They're a little more tension involved. Then again, I just kind of regrouped and said, I've played this. I bet I played this solo 400 times. And I'm not going to play anything different. I'm just going to play what I'm supposed to play. And that's the creativity part of it. Just play what I'm supposed to play.
So even with this much experience behind you, you're still getting nervous.
Well, at times, it's better now, because I just try to, like I said, adopt that principle of, okay, I'm here because I'm a professional and I know what I'm doing. So just know what you're doing and do it. Don't second guess anything. Just do it.
Well, we always say that to get over imposter syndrome, all you have to do is be educated. The more educated you are on whatever your craft is, then there's less chance for you to have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about those shows, you've played all of them. Is there any that were better than others?
They were all high points in different ways, Letterman was cold, but it was truly so cool to be there and do that show, Let's see, what is the other guy? Jimmy Fallon. Yeah, Jimmy Fallon was fun. Done that at least twice, and he is a super cool guy. Always comes over and says hello to everybody. Make sure he shakes everyone's hand and just thanks for being here. And
talented too. I mean, he could sing himself.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can't remember if it was Jimmy Fallon or somebody else that used to walk around a sound check playing guitar all the time.
Probably Jimmy Fallon.
A couple of little amps over in the corner, and he'd just walk around while he's doing his monologue. He just sat in there playing guitar, playing a Telecaster. Going, wow, that's kind of cool.
That's awesome. So we do this piece here that we call Unsung Heroes, where we try to shine a spotlight on somebody who's behind the scenes, maybe helped you or supported you in your career. Is there anybody that you'd like to shine a little bit of light on?
Well, yeah, I'd like to thank Ronnie Sullivan for showing me that first G chord. And
the chord that started it all.
That started it all, yeah. And then there was a bass player. There is a bass player. His name is Spady Brannon. So Spady worked all the time, and he was in charge of being session leader on sessions and putting bands together. So interesting part of this is Spady and Chris Lusinger grew up in the same area, I think. So they were in bands together, came to town, and of course, Spady and Chris being friends, Spady called Chris on the sessions that he would book for publishing companies or custom records or, whatever. At that point, Garth had just hit, and Chris was becoming a really in-demand guy. So I did a few sessions with Spady outside that, and Spady goes, Chris is getting really busy. I'm going to call you. And so one of the first guys to call me regularly was Spady. And that led to 2 or 3, 4 sessions a week, every week. And then from that point, I started meeting the guys on the sessions. And then you start hanging with those guys. And then, if guitar player gets in a jam or has to bail, some guy might go, oh, call this guy. You did good on the last one, and that's how you kind of start building your career in a small way. And then I did everything I could to try to show up and be what I was supposed to be, care about it and make sure I was in tune and tried to have good tones and play in time and all that stuff and try to be an asset to the song. So there's a lot of those guys like Spady, though, for me. Every one of those guys were inspiring in some way. Even if they were just sitting there kind of scowling at you, you'd go, guys that had been doing it a long time, and they're just kind of, you're the new guy, and it's like, okay, how can I learn? What do I need to learn to make this better? And then everything would change because, oh, okay, you're not kind of trying to come in and be the new hotshot guy. You're trying to come in and be better. And I was like, okay, I see what that is. So that was a great time for me.
Now, a lot of people don't know this, but you don't bring and set up your own equipment. You use a cartridge company to do so. Do you use the same company at all times?
Yeah, I think I've been through maybe 3 companies, but they have, like you're familiar with SIR, Studio Instrument Rentals here in Nashville. I was with them for a long time, and one day they said, hey, we just can't do cartridge anymore. We don't have enough guys, and the studio business is too crazy right now. So I left, went to Thunderbird, which was a company that didn't have rehearsal halls. It was strictly a cartridge company. And, you'd have all your gear in a slot in a warehouse, and you call on and leave a message on a Codaphone or send an email, whatever. Hey, guys, I'm doing whatever I'm doing Monday morning at Starstruck Studio, and we'll start at 10, and can you have everything there? And we had a lot of gear, like a lot of different cabinets and stuff like that. And I'd say bring cabinet 1, 4, and 6 or whatever. And they'd show up with those 3, or, bring cabinet 1 and 4 and bring my AC-30. And those guys had all been in the studios enough. So you'd show up and basically I'd have my heads or whatever, my pedal board and my guitars in a big trunk sitting there and I had this really nice guitar stand. So sometimes they'd even get the guitars out and put them in the stands, depending on how busy they were. But, that may sound weird, but if you're running every day, your session is from 10 to 1 at Starstruck, and then you have to go to Berry Hill from 2 to 5. Think about packing up your own gear, trying to get everybody out at the same time and trying to get a bite of lunch, even if it's just a sandwich from a gas station. It's like you're going to be cutting it close because the guitar player is always the last guy to leave. There's like always one more thing, and it's always 1:20 or whatever, and I've got to get to a 2 o'clock somewhere, and that's where those guys came in handy.
Well, there's a couple of things you mentioned there. One, that they hopefully set your gear up to the way that you like it. Get your guitars prepped for you. So do you give them any instruction to start?
Well, usually when you decide to go with, like Thunderbird's closed, and I went to sound check at some point. The guy from sound check said, "Hey, we're moving your gear from wherever X place is closing and you're coming to sound check. Can you stop by here one afternoon this week? And we want to set up your gear. And we want to mark things that need to be marked." And so when you show up, you're pretty close to being ready to go. And that's the goal of all these guys. We show up at 9:30, have a cup of coffee, get the guitars out, make sure everything's working. And so you show up and here's where I like my stand and here's where I like my headphone box. So lots of those big headphone boxes on wheels or whatever, and they know how to put them there for you so you'd be comfortable. And I think the name of the game was showing up and sitting in the chair and going, everything's where it's supposed to be. It's not like going to a new house every day and trying to find the frying pan or something. It's like you always knew exactly where everything was, at least in my little 3-foot area.
Right. Well, you say that, but your 3-foot area's got like 6 guitars and several amps, and it's quite a compact little area.
Yeah.
But it's funny to me because coming from the engineering world and starting as an assistant and working my way up, that the expectation is that you get things right and you get it right on the first try, and that you're very quick, because when it's time to hit record, there's no time to waste. Everybody has to be ready. So the expectations at that point are very, very high. And I really learned the art of speed when I was working for Bob Bullock, because there was no room for error. And he had no time to try to troubleshoot something. So if it wasn't figured out before that session started, you may as well pack up and go home.
Right. Yeah.
So it gets a little stressful at times. But the other thing you mentioned was you might play a morning session at one studio, say Starstruck, which is Reba's studio. And then you might go over to Berry Hill, which is where most people would cut their songwriting demos. However, you switching from one studio to another, are you expecting cartage to get your gear from that studio to the other, or do you have a second set of gear that shows up at the other studio that's already ready for you?
Well, I don't know how cartage companies do it, but there's some kind of magic thing involved, because I would leave at 1:20 and show up at 5 till 2, and the same gear would be sitting there in the same position at the next studio. But there was a time when a bunch of us had B rigs, so they would flop. Depending, you always want your A rig to go to the master. Yeah, the big records, and then your B rig would go to the next one. But the B rig always sounded great, though. There wasn't like this good rig and an okay rig. There was always, you're going to spend the money to make them right, because like I said, everything's a record.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good point, too. With your demos, first of all, you never know who's going to hear them. But second of all, you don't know if a demo will all of a sudden become a master at some point. I mean, that's happened as well. So you want to always perform at your best. Yeah. All right, sir, what's next for you?
Well, I'm out doing some Reba dates right now, and we've got 3 or 4 more weekends, and then we are done for the year. In country, we usually do like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, home Sunday, and then you leave again Wednesday, depending on if you're flying or busing, So most of those weeks I'll have sessions Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, leave Wednesday night, do that. And then, for me, when Reba and Brooks and Dunn did have the same management, I started playing some shows with Brooks and Dunn. Same thing with them. Then we start, after this 3 or 4 week run with Reba, then I jump right into rehearsals with Brooks and Dunn, and we do that same thing kind of for the summer, only it's, maybe 2 or 3 weekends a month, not crazy. But then I kind of get back to my session thing, and, again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, leave. Feel very fortunate that everything seems to work the way it is, for the time being.
Well, that's awesome. What advice do you have for an up-and-coming guitar player or session musician?
For somebody that's up and coming, I would listen to as many styles as you can possibly listen to. You remember Tower Records?
Oh, yeah.
So I used to go there about once a month and leave with about 10 records. And I would go through the pop section, and then I would go through the top 40 country section, and I would go through the world section. I'd go to jazz and swing, sometimes hip hop. That's when we were all listening to CDs, and you had a CD player in your car. So I could put a CD in my car and listen to it for a week and just hear it kind of randomly, as I'm moving between studios or driving to work in the morning. And, it just puts ideas and thoughts in your head, because I've always thought, like, if we move from a swing song to a sort of a blues song, if I could get the right tone, then I could play the right parts. Because if you have what you're hearing, then you can learn a few of those licks, and then all of a sudden, that's not going to make you a genius at playing swing. That means you can get by playing swing. Like, there was some of that going on in the 90s, and a fiddle player, it'd be fiddle, steel, and guitar all playing these licks together. And I had to have an idea on what that meant. And fortunately for me, some of those guys were patient enough to go, Jeff, here's your notes. These are your notes in this line, and here's what we play. And then you just play it and you go, wow, I just can't believe that, the way it sounds. So, but that just comes from listening to everything and keep practicing, and don't stop for a minute to think, man, I'm really good, because that's the time you walk in and see a guy like Brent standing there playing, on some crappy amp on something, and you just be going, oh my gosh, I need to go back home. I'm going to drop my ego off at the corner, because egos is sometimes a good thing, but mostly it takes you to a place away from what you really need to be doing, which is serving a song. Serve the song.
Man, I can tell you, being lucky to work with a handful of different producers in Nashville, I would learn something from each one of them. So whether it be a Matt McClure and the way he would just try anything. I mean, there was no rules with Matt. He would just try stuff. Yeah. And he'd be like, well, who cares? It worked. And then you get someone like a Bob Bullock who has his way of doing stuff. And so, I mean, I would just learn a little something from each one of them. And that really does mean a lot after a while.
Absolutely.
Jeff, sir, do you have any final words for us tonight?
Jay, what a great time I've had. Thanks for having me on your show, and it's great to see you. I know I haven't seen you in a while, and glad you're doing well, and let's just all stay healthy and happy.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I loved hearing about Jeff's time on the road, in the studio, and with such great producers. I have to give Jeff a big thanks for joining us this week and sharing his stories. And thank you for taking the time to hang with me here. I really do appreciate that. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. You can do just that, and you can also find the links to everything mentioned on this episode over at jayfranze.com/episode 6. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Franze Show. Make sure you visit us at jayfranze.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.